I think what I took a lot from NIP was just kind of like what kind of things are important and what kind of things maybe even some players need some refreshers on, but more so individual decision making or why somebody paths this way versus that way, or why somebody throws the flash here in this direction or in this way as opposed to this. You can have like a CT sided coach or a T sided coach, right? Something like that.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another interview. Today, I'm going to be in with Mahone. I'm very happy to have you on. You know, we've been chatting for a little while, got him sorted. You know, I think I sent a bunch of messages around during the kind of Christmas period. Maybe not the best time to try and pin people down. So, you know, here we are. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on, mate.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No worries. All right. So, generally where we start, especially with someone like yourself, to kind of get a little bit more out of you. I think people will be familiar with your kind of more recent work and some of the content that you're now moving into. We'll talk about that. But I guess, could you just highlight kind of a brief history of your playing time and some of your other roles within CSGO?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of a short history from me. When I started playing Source maybe back in 2010 or so, and then moved to CS:GO when it came out. And during that time, I only played maybe a couple of different leagues. So I played like a collegiate league, CSL, and I also played a bit of ESCA, where I was able to make it to MDL. But then after I reached that point, I kind of realized that I didn't really have it in me anymore. So I basically just decided to retire. And around that time, that's when I started making YouTube content, just because I kind of thought that I had a lot to give to the community. And then after that, after I did that for maybe a handful of months, then I had a lot of praise from casters, talent, and then eventually I got the job at NIP as an analyst. And then now moving forward, I'm basically going to be coming back to content because that's just what I enjoy.
Okay. All right, there you go. That's pretty much perfect. Yeah, I think the brief history, because indeed I want to keep things, to what's been happening more recently. So obviously, as mentioned, as people will probably know, analysis role within NIP, I think, is a really interesting one to talk about, because if you're a little more active within the scene and you kind of pay attention or work within it, as you and I do, you'll probably know that the analyst role is somewhat vague of a title. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it really does differ between teams, between organizations, right? As I mentioned to you, as people might have seen, because I guess the upload cycle, Innershine kind of sees himself a little bit more of an assistant coach. But then I've kind of heard of, analysts within, especially like mid-level teams, that just watch a lot of demos and give a few thoughts, and if it's taken up, great. Sometimes not. Sometimes it is, anti-stratting and things like that. I guess my next question, therefore, would be, what was your role as an analyst? What were you fulfilling for NIP?
Yeah, I think this role kind of changed a lot for me over the course of the year. I think Innershine puts it well with the way that he works with FaZe. Is pretty similar with what I was to NIP, where I was basically just the assistant to Threat, and I just helped the team in any way that I can think of. Right, I think some of my main duties were more involved with anti-stratting, and of course, coming up with protocols, reviewing with the team, implementing like newer things that the team could use. But in a nutshell, it's hard to describe all the duties, right? But I would just say it's basically just being an assistant to the coach. And it is different among analysts on different teams. Sometimes they have varied duties or roles and stuff like that. But for me at NIP, it was basically I did whatever I could to assist Bjorn in the team, or Threat in the team.
Indeed. And do you feel your time at NIP? I think the kind of tenure there, and the time period that you were there, definitely had a lot more ups than downs. I think certainly in the past few months it has been a little rocky. But ultimately, very simple question. Are you satisfied with the work that you did? Did you want to stay maybe a little bit longer? Would you have liked to have even a heavier hand in decision making and whatnot, or were you happy with where things were at?
I would say that I was pretty happy with my 1 year. I mean, ultimately, I was the one who decided to leave NIP at the end of it. I could have decided to stay if I wanted to, but my contract expiring and basically where my heart was at the time, which was, I guess, not that long ago, I just wanted to come back to doing more YouTube, doing more content creation, just because, when I was over there in Europe for the major and Blast Fall, I met a lot of different people who kind of started driving me towards this direction of coming back. And yeah, I feel pretty content with the time I had at NIP.
For sure. So, I guess we'll kind of move into the content a little bit later, right? But my next question here is ultimately, is coaching maybe a desire? Is that something that perhaps, because it does feel on a natural progression, maybe not at the moment, but something in the future. Will you perhaps go back, maybe in the near future? I think you could quite easily slot into an MDL team, or well, a Challenger League team as it's now called. Is that something that you want to do, or are you like fully set on making this content creation a full-time, gig really?
I think for now, I just want to focus on content creation. Maybe in the future, maybe like a year from now or something like that, if the right opportunity presented
Mm.
itself, then I would be open to the idea of coaching. But I think at the moment, content creation and YouTube is all I really want to focus on right now, and just kind of see where it goes. In a similar way, where before with my YouTube channel, maybe a year ago, before NIP and everything, I was just doing it just to see where it would go, right? And I kind of want to give myself more space and time to see where that leads to as well this time before I move on to working with other teams and stuff like that.
Okay, so moving into the content, right? And I think that this is an area that I've talked about with a few different people from different angles. Obviously, I've kind of been doing the interviews for a little while, trying to get more players in, because that seems to me, players, analysts, like team members, coaches, things like that. Seems to be, the best way for me to build up the skill set and also kind of get the viewership and things like that, right? Because I did have a few people earlier on. It was longer form. I was certainly more acquainted with them and whatnot, so maybe we could, just talk about anything, but didn't necessarily bring in as many of the viewers that you know what I mean. So you kind of have to find like this middle ground. I think that certainly the angle that you have with your content, right, is fairly saturated. There's a lot of people, especially with COVID being a thing and people being at home, and I might as well give it a go. Why not? I've always thought about it, right? And there's been a lot of people like that creating the analysis content, right? So what is it that you find I guess differentiates in a way from other people? Is it kind of that on-hand experience that you've got? Is it the way that you view the game, the way that you present the videos? What is it to you that gives it a unique Mahone spin?
I don't know. It's kind of a hard question to answer for myself, but I think I think I've had a decent experience as a player, right? And as well working with the tier one team now at this point. I think the main things are, I think what I took a lot from NIP was just kind of like what kind of things are important and what kind of things maybe even some players need some refreshers on, right? Because even some of the things that you kind of think are more foundational, sometimes the players forget, or sometimes they don't do it as well as you think they should be. So I would say that I think maybe that's where some of my strengths are, and maybe some of the way I explain things, or I don't know. It's very hard for me to, to answer that kind of
Mm.
question. But I'd like to think that I take a lot of time, or I spend a lot of time on my videos to try to streamline them as much as I can, and to try to uh, create something that it isn't easy to just do it off the first time, right? It's something that's requires a lot of time, a lot of thinking, and a lot of kind of just, it's kind of like molding clay, where you got to do it for a while to really make something that's really good, right? I think maybe that's where the difference is.
And so obviously you've learned a lot, right, from the experience that you have, and you're able to bring that in, as you kind of saying. What areas of the game, I guess, do you find the most interesting? Is there sort of a bit of a niche, a bit of a nuance within the game, whether it is like utility is quite a common one that, a few other content creators focus on. Do you have like an area that you're really, really interested in delving deep into?
I think one of the things that I've become a bit more interested in, after all my experience and everything, is just finding ways to kind of explain um, the small little details in the meta. So not necessarily utility, but more so individual decision making, or why somebody paths this way versus that way, or why somebody throws the flash here in this direction or in this way as opposed to this. So I think it's more so trying to dissect the details and trying to explain some of the more nuanced things that happen in CS that you wouldn't necessarily see on a broadcast, or even just like a simple tutorial like utility video. I think that's where I'm trying to go into more of a direction of, and just trying to, I guess, in a way, like uncover some of the team's protocols that you see, right? Sometimes teams have very deliberate tactics for dealing with certain situations. Those are the kind of situations I want to be able to cover in my videos, and they're not easy to find, and they can be quite hard to explain. But I think that's where the challenge is for me, is to try to find those and try to explain them in a really good way, in a really digestible way, and make it entertaining or useful for the viewers.
Okay, and so I guess in a way it's kind of an obvious answer, but maybe avoiding like, the growth of and that kind of thing. Is there somewhere that you want to take the content that's maybe outside of YouTube, right? Because my brain kind of jumps to a lot of broadcasts out there, maybe lacking some of the shoulder content and whatnot. Is that perhaps something that you think you could refine and, work in there as something to go on during the breaks? Or maybe it might be a bit difficult to pull off, but you have a break after map 1, and during the sort of analysis segment that the desk is doing, you can perhaps with a team come up with like a 4 or 5 minute video of a breakdown of a play that can be included within the break. Is that maybe something that A, I guess you think is doable, and B, you would want to do?
Yeah, I think that's something that's definitely doable, and it'd be something I'm definitely open to, right? If it was like ESO or Blast and just asked me, it's okay, do you want to make some shoulder content or maybe some kind of segment in between? I'd definitely be open to that. I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the stuff that I did, with NIP when it came to anti-strategy and stuff like that, it gives a whole new insight on like how teams play, because, you know, uh, once you gain the skill of learning how to anti-strat opponents and learning their tendencies and stuff like that, that kind of skill kind of carries over to broadcasts, I would imagine too, because even back when I was working with NIP, when I'd watch the games, back when I was more in North America compared to in Sweden, when I watched the match on the stream, I could see a lot of the things that I told the team to watch out for, or the team to try to counter, right? So being able to kind of have that knowledge coming into a match, right, from a more broadcast perspective, I think if there was a way to kind of communicate that before the matches, or even in between, to kind of get the viewers on the same page of, as soon as they see that play in the match, they're gonna know what it's supposed to be, or how it's supposed to work, or even, let's just say they do some kind of fake of it, right? Then you kind of know, okay, this is something different. This is part of like a game plan, maybe. So I think that's like maybe the next step to elevating broadcast on the more analysis front. But it's I have to say it's not that easy to pull off.
No, yeah, I think certainly would need kind of like a whole team going for it at the very least, to create to the same level as like a YouTube piece, right?
Yep.
I guess it's one of those sort of interesting things where in sort of conventional sports you have obviously the real life element, and then a little bit of the augmented reality. I don't know, it's probably a bit difficult actually within a game to add the augmented stuff to it, or to go back and to fully break down with that, not taking very much time and whatnot. And I suppose as well, there's a little bit more rigidity to some sports that makes it easier to highlight this point because it's happened 10 times already, but it's slightly different this time, and that's why it's effective or whatever. So I think certainly room and scope and shoulder content's always a big argument, but difficult to pull off for sure. I kind of wanted to pull back a little bit, actually, to talk, around this whole support staff angle. This is something that I brought up with Inner Shine as well. having been within the system, right? Do you think that maybe we need more? Should there be a handful of analysts on the team? Should there, one of the sort of wackier suggestions that I had was like, do we even begin to design like role-specific coaches that, maybe once Nico retires or whatever, he can just teach everybody how to run in on T side and, focus on the more rifle-heavy entry players and whatnot and just coach them. Is that maybe something that you see as effective? And then, following on from that, do you think that support teams need to grow?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you kind of look at some players, right, especially at when I was with NIP, a lot of younger players, right, there are a lot of different aspects that were, maybe lacking a little bit, right? So I can definitely see that if support staff had more pieces that they could work with, kind of like, I guess, like in hockey, how there's a goaltending coach, right? It's the same thing where I think, if Nico retired and he wanted to, basically, if he was able, or if he was willing to coach, like, players on how to do crosshair placement properly or counter strafing properly, like those are the fundamentals that, like, he's really really good at, right? And I'm sure he has routines and methods to help enhance that, right? Like, you don't just get that good just by, you know pure talent, right? Although talent is part of it, you still have to work at it too. So I think so, yes. I don't think teams are at a place yet to be able to do that, because I think, at least with NIP, I think part of it was also just trying to figure out, like, how involved or how much would you want the analyst to do, right? And or even, like, what is the interaction between the head coach, the analyst, performance coach, the rest of the team, general manager, right? There's so many pieces that it's kind of hard to I guess make sense at this moment with the CS team, right? Like, I mean, the most obvious thing I can kind of think of is just, obviously you can have like a CT sided coach or a T sided coach, right? Something like that,
Mm.
as simple as that, where they just focus on one half of the game, right? Or who knows, maybe even one day it could be like you have map specific coaches, right? So it's like, this guy's like the expert on Vertigo or something like that, right? I don't know, but I think there's definitely a lot of possibility, but it's just, I don't think teams are at a spot to be able to fully incorporate it yet. Maybe in like 5 to 10 years, it could definitely be possible, and I really think it should go that way, but it's not easy at this time.
Mm. Definitely like an interesting thought experiment type deal
Mm.
at this point. Yeah, so I guess as well, following on from that a little bit, I don't know if you had any kind of dealings with. Well, I guess some of the players, right, moved around. The young ninjas and the academy kind of projects.
Mhm.
I think that at the moment is maybe an area that they could start to test, things like
Yep.
that, and have a few, more experienced people. I don't think that the idea of like, egos and I kind of know better than you because I have, major MVPs and all this kind of thing is maybe not going to affect at all down there, with those types of teams. So I don't know. I guess generally, what are your opinions on the academy scene in terms of cultivating and growing players? Because I think it's a hell of a lot healthier than what we've had before, where you have young players trying to prove themselves on sort of already established mid-level teams, where it can be harder for them to get resources and things like that. So I personally think the academy teams are really good.
Yeah, I think the same thing too. I think the whole academy system is a great thing for the scene, and for teams as well, right? Obviously with NIP, we probably used like 3 academy players
Yeah.
throughout the year, right? With 2 of them being more like a permanent, being on like a permanent spot on the team. I think with academy teams, right? At least with us with NIP, obviously I can't go into too much, but uh, I think there's still a lot of potential with the way the main team can use the academy teams. We had done a few things with the academy teams as well, which, you know was kind of useful. Some of it maybe not as much, right? But I think the biggest thing that made it difficult to even experiment too much with academy teams, or that whole interaction, was because, the young ninjas played so many matches all the time. Like, they because they're in that like tier 2, tier 3ish like area. They play so many matches, so many tournaments, and some of them are in school and stuff like that. So they're not really like a full time team, right? They just play it, after school kind of thing, right? But And that's what made things difficult, right? Every time we tried to schedule, practices or things that we can do among both the teams, time was the biggest factor. And for us, we didn't get to use the academy team as much as we'd want to. Probably the biggest thing we got from the academy team was more so just being able to foster some talent and then bring them into the main team, which I think ultimately for most academy teams or players on academy teams, that's what they're looking for, right? A shot at the at the main team, or maybe to get a shot at like another tier one team, right? Like maybe with Monacy and G2, right?
Indeed. No, I think it really is kind of opening things up, and even then, like the Navi Junior scouting seems really good. At the very least, in the Academy League, they have I think it's that Chiron guy, if I'm getting it right. He's also kind of been taking over, so it seems that the scouting there is really solid, which is really cool to see. So yeah, but look, I think that's going to do us. A quick kind of 20 minutes. I got through everything that I wanted to ask, and had a lot of fun. It was good, and I'm definitely thinking, now that I'm getting a few more voices on and hands-on experience type people, we got to start a little bit of a roundtable talk show type thing at some point, to delve a bit deeper, I suppose. But once again, Mahone, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on, mate.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.